Well, this is another day, as you can see, and actually another shirt. My interviewer, Tom, reminds me that I was talking about my college fraternity. So I'll just give a couple of anecdotes there, and then I'm going back to family. One of my friends in the fraternity was a good friend, a guy named Dick Alpert, who did not live in the fraternity house because he was what was known as a townie. He lived in Newton, had a car, which was unusual for us average people at that time. He was not average. His father was a big-time lawyer in Boston, and he became the president of the Boston Main Railroad. And one night, my friend Dick Alpert said, my father's coming in to show us something interesting. Come. So his father and a man named Abram Sacker on the front seat of the car, and Dick and I were on the back seat of the car. He took us and he says, this was the grounds of the former Middlesex Medical School, which had been closed a long time. Middlesex Medical School, incidentally, was developed because there was such a strict anti-Jewish, anti-Italian feeling by the Medical School Admissions Committee that proprietary medical schools were established, one of them being Middlesex, and most of its doctors turned out were Jewish and Italian, but had been closed. And these two men, George Alpert and Abram Sacker, started a new college, the first college in the United States, general college, liberal arts college, established by a Jewish group. And it was Brandeis, of course. We went out there, we saw that in its initial phase. Dick Alpert went on to become an exponent of a new experimental drug called LSD. And he and his guru, Tim Leary, were at Harvard doing graduate studies utilizing this particular drug. But after they were told not to do it, they continued, and they were both arrested. Tim Leary is now gone, but Dick Alpert soon thereafter became a Hindu, and then he was a Buddhist also, as far as I know, and he was known all over the place as Baba Ram Das. And anybody who was into this Eastern type religion knows Ram Das. That was my friend, and I saw him many years later when he came to Worcester and spoke to a college group. All good stuff. Stop drugs, he said. Meditation alone will get you out of trouble. That was Ram Das. So much for, I think
What was your question to Ram Dass when you met with him?
What do I remember about Ram?
What was your question when you met him in Worcester?
My question to Ram Dass was this. He explained that with the beauty of his Hindu religion, they now believe that man should treat other men equally, that should treat animals nicely, should be good to one another, very humanistic. And so at the end with questions, I said, Baba Ram Das, may I call you Dick, as we knew one another years ago? How does any of this differ from the Judaism that you learned and practiced when we knew one another as younger people? And he said, not at all. Not at all. Ram Das. He now made the cover of a recent Tufts alumni magazine. Sitting on his beach chair in Hawaii, he now has had a stroke and suffers from a lot of disabilities, decided that he would never again leave Hawaii, and is very much involved in the phenomenon called death and dying. And he was the caregiver for his father, this famous George Alpert, when his father became incapacitated before he died. Let me go back now. I told you a little bit by where my father came from. Let's switch to my mother's story. You picked her up when she was growing up as a kid on East 5th Street on the Lower East Side of New York, in the same building as I told you where one of these movie magnates lived as a kid as well. Anyway, her maiden name was Straussman. I spent a lot of time with her parents, my grandparents, because every Christmas vacation we would go to get on the train and go to New York, Brooklyn, where they lived. And they lived on right off Havermeyer Street in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. They had a tailor shop on the sort of sub-floor, sort of a basement, and you walk down to it, and they lived on the one floor above. And he was a very good tailor and presser, and my grandmother, named Yetta, his name was Samuel, my grandfather's name was Samuel, like my father's name. Yetta was a wonderful dressmaker, and there's a picture of me when I'm maybe a year and a half, 2 years old, wearing a beautiful little Lord Fauntleroy velvet suit with a puffy shirt. Of course, she made that. And my mother said that she had the eye for seeing a pattern, seeing a design, seeing the customer, and cutting out her own pattern, knowing the size. That's good. But anyway, she, after my grandfather passed away, we'll get back to him in a minute, she lived with us for a while in Worcester. And she made the most marvelous pastries. They were like coffee cakes. They had sort of a cinnamon and honey aroma and flavor to them. They're absolutely delicious. And
was she American born?
Pardon?
Where was she from?
Now, both of them came from Hungary. And they were in the days of when Franz Joseph was the king of Austria-Hungary. Things were good for the Jews, and my grandfather never said Franz Joseph without saying Franz Joseph of blessed memory. They spoke Yiddish, but the Yiddish they spoke was really German because they were on that Austria-Hungary border. And when they came to this country, when they visited Worcester, my grandfather, I remember going to the barber shop, and he was talking to the barber. When we finished, the barber, Mr. Berman, said to me, what language is he speaking? Because it was primarily German. He was a very wonderful joke teller. Oh, did he tell jokes? I wish I could remember some of the jokes, but I do remember this. His jokes were peopled with individuals, and his favorite individual, of a guy who used to get in trouble, was named Yoili Flomplatz. Isn't that a great name? Yoili Flomplatz. That's my grandfather. My grandfather, unfortunately, became more and more hard of hearing, and then became quite deaf. No hearing aid. He was a wonderful guy with a big white and now stained with yellow mustache, because he was constantly smoking a pipe. And he had some meerschaum pipes too. I read a novel recently in which the person escaped from Europe with his meerschaum pipe, and it was deep enough to have his supply of diamonds under the tobacco. Of course, they would not ignite, so I hope that he came with diamonds too. And that was Samuel. My grandmother was a very short little lady named Yetta, as I say, and she was constantly cold. And in Worcester, we had radiators in the kitchen. She would stand next to the radiator or sit next to the radiator saying, "Oi, it's cold," meaning it's cold. They taught my mother how to cook, and she was a wonderful cook. My favorite recipe, well, she had two things. We had a kosher home, she made chicken a la king, made without cream, of course, but she made something with flour in it. The chicken a la king was delicious beyond belief. But she also made marvelous salmon croquettes that we had every Sunday. Salmon croquettes and green peas were our Sunday dinner. During the week, she made salmon croquettes, which were with a bone on it and an egg and mozzarella coating on them. Oh, were they good. But my favorite, which Sylvia, my wife, says, well, I'll never duplicate it because even if I did, you'd say hers was better, was rolled steak. It was shoulder steak, and it was filled with mushrooms and carrots and celery, and then rolled up and tied and baked like that. It was wonderful. And then you'd cut the string on your plate and open up to all this aroma and wonderful taste. Rolled steak. My mother was a very active Brooklyn Dodgers fan. And she took us to Ebbets Field. I was there at least once that I remember, because Ebbets Field is long gone, big apartment complex there now. But we liked the Dodgers. Never paid much attention to the Giants or the Yankees, even though she was a New Yorker through and through, and spoke with a wonderful New York accent, which I developed so much so that even though we moved to Worcester when I was 7 weeks old, my high school yearbook, because I was the editor, but I didn't write my comments on my picture, but they said, sounds like a New Yorker. Maybe I still do. As a matter of fact, today, I was in the car with my son, Tom, who is now my interview and editor, and he said something which I didn't quite understand, because he says dog, and I say dog, and so forth. My mother had one brother, Joe, and Joe worked in the tailor shop with his father. Nice guy. And they and his wife, Sally, and Joe was born in New York, as was my mother, but Sally was born in the Pale of Settlement in Russia. A very nice lady, and we would stay with them and visit them on these Christmas vacations. It was all one big apartment. One daughter named Evelyn. Evelyn is exactly my sister Gloria's age. And they were very, very good friends. And I was very good friends with Evelyn too. And we still are, because Evelyn and her husband Joey moved to Albuquerque, which originally they called Albuquerque, many, many years ago. And they lived in an area where almost all the people had come from Brooklyn to move to Albuquerque. And he was very much interested in car situations. So when in New York, I think that he probably scratched out a living, maybe driving a taxi, doing some repairs, doing things with cars. They moved to Albuquerque. He opened up one and then 2 stores of car repair things for the home, for the guy who did work in his own garage. And they were successful. They bought a house and lived in this nice area, and things have been good. Sylvia and I recently visited them. We had seen them once before, some years ago, but visited them specifically on, and I don't mind jumping around like this, on the 2nd week of October, because that is the week of the great balloon festival, when hundreds and hundreds of balloons from all over the world rise in a great field of Albuquerque. And that the rising, because of wind and weather and aircraft traffic and all, started about 6 o'clock in the morning. We were out there each morning about 6 o'clock, watching the balloons. The balloons, some of them are shaped like the ordinary balloon you see, but they have balloons shaped like castles and Uncle Sam and Presbyterian Church and all the fanciful shapes you can imagine. and can't imagine because it's such a great, great festival. And does it bring dollars into Albuquerque? Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, let's get back to my father's family. I told you he came over. The brothers he brought over from, and sisters from Europe one at a time, were my Uncle Fred, who had, he and Henrietta, his wife, 2 sons, Royal Flag Jonas, middle name Flag because he was born on June 14th, which is Flag Day, and Stanley. Royal became a lawyer, very well known in Miami Beach. He, by the way, established a medical school. That's another story. Stanley was a physician, very busy, very well respected and honest internist, retired now, whose son Ivan took over that big practice, where there were 4 or 5 physicians working. Fred, my uncle, started out in Kentucky. I just can't think of the name of it. Henderson, no, I can't think of the name of the town. But he started off, as so many of these Jewish people did, with a dry goods store. A dry goods store sells white goods, which are sheets and pillowcases and towels and that sort of thing. And he called it Jonas, I presume. And he knew that people were calling it the Jew store. So he put an ad in the paper which says, "Come to the new store, come to the Jew store." When I told Stanley, and that's what Fred told me, when I told the sons about it, they said, never, 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 no. And then, a year or 2 ago, a book appeared, written by a young lady from Tennessee, whose parents owned the similar thing, and the name of the book is The Jew Store. Now another The Jew Store was my father's sister Sonia, who married Meyer Fine, and they call it Fines, F-E-I-N, Fines Dry Goods. And that was in Woodbury, Tennessee, a town of 500 people. They ran it for many years and did well, enough so that they retired to Miami Beach. And my cousin Joy, exactly my age, their only child, moved down with them, of course, and they married Morty, oh my God, I'm blocked on Morty's last name right now. Freed, Morty Freed, and Sylvie and I are in Miami right now, going to Joy and Morty Freed's grandson's bar mitzvah. So I say it's in the end of May, the year 2007.
Tell us about the little tiff between Joy's mother and your father.
Every family has situations. As it turned out, Sonia had sociologic problems. She just did not really get along very well with others or with members of her family. And almost every member of her family just could not deal with this. And she was pretty much on her own. And so was her daughter, Joy, forced into it. I think that Meyer Fine passed away first, but about 2 weeks after Sonia Yanofsky Fine passed away, and that's got to be, maybe 15 years ago, I got a letter or a phone call from Joy saying, "Stuart, this is your cousin Joy, and I want to make up for lost time." Isn't that touching and beautiful? And we did, because year after year, Stanley, her cousin, my cousin Fred's son, the doctor guy, Stanley and Dolly had a ski place at Steamboat that they had with another of their physician friends from Miami Beach. And each year, Stanley and Dolly would go for 2 weeks and invite Morty and Joy and Sylvia and Stu. It was great. We were together for 2 weeks, just had the greatest time, and making up for lost time. Joy, Morty, Sylvia and Stu have never missed an important family event, traveling here or there or to Mexico. That's a short story we'll get to in a moment. The only event they missed was when their grandson, 13 years ago, was born. They were on a trip to Africa, and I, who had become a Moyle by now, was in Florida doing the bris on this same little boy. And I said, it's a pity that my cousin, his grandparents, cannot be here, but they are now in Tanzania, their family home, which of course it wasn't. But anyway, they were shocked that they would have to be in Africa at the time of the bris, but you can't take a ride back and forth. Now, I told you about the Now, there was also Uncle Ben, my father's brother, who moved to New York and then to Worcester. He was married at least once and then divorced, tried his hand at the restaurant business in Worcester, but that didn't work out. But after my father died in 1942, he came and helped my mother, and it would have been very, very difficult without him. So that's my Uncle Ben, who then retired and moved to Miami, the other family home, and dyed his hair red, and I understand, and I hope he did, became a great guy with the ladies. He passed away also. Now, in the
How
early
many years did Ben spend in the restaurant?
How much time did he spend there? Well, it's difficult for me to know when they actually, when my mother closed it and retired. But she started when I was 12 years old, and she had it, and I went back every vacation and worked in the restaurant, certainly in high school, and then in college, and then in medical school as well. So I got out of medical school when I'm about how old? 28 or 27. And I think it was probably around that time when my mother gave up the restaurant and retired. And Ben stayed there all that time.
And so she closed the restaurant at that time?
Well, it wasn't that she closed it. It was in a department store, but she got out of it, and we were the only non-Greek restaurant people in the city of Worcester, because that's just how it worked out. A Greek family came in and took it over at the pleasure of the owners of the department store.
In other words, it was a bad deal for your mother.
I don't think my mother sold it at all. She just ended her relationship with it. It was in a space owned by the department store, and every month she would pay 15% of gross to the department store. So it wasn't a huge money maker, but it certainly was enough so that we felt okay, and went to schools, had vacations, car, lived nicely, and that's what it did for us. Now, I told you about the McCarran Act, which closed the doors to immigration, particularly of Jews, from the Pale of Settlement. And so there was my father's brother, Kutya, called Simon in English and Spanish, Simon, went to Mexico, along with Manya, who went to Mexico. Simon Kutya married a woman whose maiden name was Krasnykutsky. And her brother, Krasnykutsky, was the most decorated Russian general in that short war of Russia versus Finland. Simon